Yeah, I was hoping John would be here. So it's 6 o'clock on January 15th, 2025. I'd like to call the January meeting of the planning board to session. First, and we'll just get straight to it. First order of business is to approve the meeting minutes from the December meeting. Did anybody have any changes that they wanted to make? Okay, perfect. So I submit that we approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. The first order in the old business is LD 2003. I would really like to kind of put this to bed, I think one way or the other for the planning board, whether we need to deal with it or not. I still, excuse me, my understanding of exactly what is necessary by the planning board or the town is it's not very clear, to say the least. So I think, Tom, you may be helpful, and I would like to try and keep this as simple as we can. But get the language in whatever document it needs to go into, so that we can move on. I don't know, Orion, if you had any other thoughts on that before I let Tom take over.
I'm sure I'll have thoughts after Tom takes over.
Okay, why don't Tom, why don't you go ahead and give us your thoughts?
I'll try to be very clear, concise, to the point, and also target a couple of statements made by the state, given that this is a state LD and public law. The driving questions remain for the planning board. Do we even need to do this? And so if I may, co-chairs, start at that point. Do we really need to do this? And I'm going to give you two schools of thought. The first school of thought is called preventative medicine, that we get a jump start on something that ultimately is going to need to be tackled. And if you wait too long, and what does too long mean? A couple of years, then you'll be in crisis management instead of preventative medicine. And what's driving that statement coming from me as your planner is there's very few planners in this state that are looking at cumulative impacts. I live in York County. I see what's going on there, and I've taken it upon myself off of time to analyze community by community what their cumulative impacts are. And when I add up, and I'm not even partway done, I'm over 3,000 units that will be constructed under the auspices of affordable housing within the next 18 months in York County. And I have not gone through many of the inland communities yet. So why is that important? It's important because those cumulative impacts will ultimately be coming into Cumberland County. They're here, but on a much smaller scale, much smaller scale. You take Scarborough, for example, they're creating a whole new town center. And within that center, there's at least 7 and more planned mid-rise complexes, averaging anywhere from 30 to 90 units each building. Ultimately, Scarborough too will run out of land. And ultimately, there'll be more and more pressure being placed on Cumberland County and most importantly, Pownell. So looping back, we can tackle it now and do a simple proviso in the conservation subdivision ordinance, which would be the opportune time because of the intense work that has to be done to do a conservation subdivision. Or we could wait to see when those two, I'm estimating two conservation subdivisions coming forth in 2025. So those will be fairly large scale. It'll be interesting for us to find out, and particularly interesting also for the CEOs to be knowledgeable of, is it going to have affordable housing in it, or is it a conservation subdivision of just, shall we say, higher economic strata? So those are unanswered questions. Yeah, we could wait and see and still not endanger ourselves. So as your planner, I'm happy either way. I can make it work either way. The first pit stop for conservation subdivision is with the planning office. And as you've noticed from the checklist that's been created for conservation subdivisions, is extremely thorough. So now let's focus on two questions that we've all been struggling with. And I'm just going to read this from a state document because it addresses two questions that have been driving us mad. What happens if the municipality does not enact a local ordinance or tries to and does not update approved by the legislative body? LD 2003 is an express preemption on the municipality's home rule authority. Therefore, any ordinance or regulation that is not consistent with the law, that being the state law, may be challenged as invalid. Municipalities are encouraged to contact legal counsel to discuss how the law will affect the enforcement of other ordinances. And both Tim and Bill, I wanted to compliment them both. They've been very diligent about looking at these little nuances and individual components of the ordinance. And its discovery process is a very difficult one because we're making a bunch of presumptions about something that hasn't come yet. Lastly, it's important to speak with legal counsel how to discuss the law will affect the enforcement of the existing ordinances and the existing regulations. This conversation has just started, but I think our select board is about to discuss what are the next steps with legal counsel on questions that have surfaced both from the CEOs and from myself. We don't want to presume what we're reading in the state public law is accurate because many times it doesn't say shall do, it says may do. So it's a bit confusing. The other piece that that the planning board has been grappling with is growth areas. We have no designated growth areas that are currently part of the comprehensive plan, okay? That doesn't mean that we don't have growth areas, it's just that they're not designated. And I think we're many steps away from the conversation. I could show you three, what I consider major growth areas that you'll be seeing within the next 5 years. It's quite obvious with the physicality of the site. So the next question, this is state of Maine language. Question, if the town does not have growth areas as defined by section 4349 and does not have areas served by water and sewer, does it need to comply with LD 2003? Their answer, these communities would not be subject to affordable housing density provisions in section 4 and would not have areas that are required to allow up to 4 units on a residential lot per section 5. Other sections of LD 2003 would apply. Doesn't say which ones. Okay. The dilemma in answering point-specific questions and giving general answers is it doesn't always help us with a full answer. And I think that's where we are on that. My recommendation to the board is, again, we need to seek legal counsel on this, okay? Are there solutions to it? As to a growth area, there's two schools of thought. If the town wants to step up to the plate and go the next step and define where these growth areas are, as a collaborative with townspeople, a committee, however the select board would like to do it, I think that's one of our next steps is we're there. It's now fairly obvious where the growth areas are going to be. So that's preparedness again. So, and I would argue the flip side of growth areas, which the state defines as having public water and public sewer. I would argue that if I was defending a client in the private sector, that if I came into Tim's office and Bill's office and said, I have a DEP approved cluster system, and I've got a well that's pushing 40 GPM, tell me why I can't do this. It'd be really hard to argue if they could provide the dimensional criteria, the acreage requirements, and then the scientific evidence that you could put in a clustered system. Engineered clustered systems are no longer a thing of the past. They're becoming more and more popular. And I think particularly when you see your next phases of larger scale subdivisions, not a mushroom here and a mushroom there, but seeing a big cluster of mushrooms, then it's going to be obvious that the cluster engineered system is the way to go. As a result of going that way, you automatically have created a growth area, a growth center. And that's why I think it's going to be fairly easy to define. It's just that we need to do this in a public forum. And if that's the direction that the board would like to go, then you've got staff and public members and our select board that would tackle the issue. Does that help? I know Ryan's got questions. I can already see them buckling out.
I always mix questions with statements. Right now, I think I lean towards the wait and see approach. I think that the idea of an affordable housing density bonus in conservation subdivision is something that I think the planning board could and probably should discuss. Whether or not we label that as an official growth zone or not, I think it's worth discussion. Do I think that, you know, it's going to make it onto the next big, if we have a real discussion about it, I don't necessarily think we should plan on trying to have a real discussion about it before the next big, you know, town meeting and have something that the town votes on. I think that's going to be a larger conversation. So my right now leaning towards, yes, let's put this on the agenda as kind of a long-term discussion where we can wrap our heads around what is, how would an affordable housing density bonus work in a conservation subdivision? And, you know, from what I see in Augusta, they're looking at creating a working group to discuss a bunch of housing stuff. And they'll meet this summer and then come up in January with a bunch of recommendations, and then we'll potentially see changes to law at the, you know, happening in 2026. So I'm not foreseeing a bunch of changes to law until then from the, you know, and it'd be great if the state did provide more clarity. My understanding, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, is yeah, the towns who have septic and sewer, they're paying a lot more attention to how do we comply with LD 2003, and the towns that don't have septic sewer systems their kind of take and wait and see approach. I think, you know, to me, it's fine if a conservation subdivision comes forward. And if they are interested in putting affordable housing in, we'll have a case study there and we can decide in that process, you know, they might come at it as from a collaborative approach and say, hey, we were interested in affordable housing. What, you know, if we put in 4 units of affordable housing, you know, what kind of bonus can you give us on density or conserving less land potentially or something? And we can try to work out something that seems reasonable. They could come at us with a more aggressive approach and say, our interpretation of LD 2003 is that you have to let us do X, Y, and Z. And then we would deal with it in that circumstance as well. Hopefully people approach us collaboratively and we could find something that makes sense and we could work through it with a case study in front of us. But in the meantime, I do think it's worth us having discussion about how might a density bonus apply to a conservation subdivision, whether or not that really, to me, the 2.5 affordable housing density bonus growth zone thing, I'm not sure if that exact percentage really works with how we've worked out conservation subdivisions. So, and you know, I think it's exciting that it does look like there's certain areas of the community that we're, you know, in this area where we're doing some water testing. And so, you know, this part of the city could in the future become a growth zone. And then we wouldn't necessarily have to put, you know, the growth zone piece into the subdivision piece. So that's some thoughts, wide ranging, interested to hear what other people think.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I agree. I think we wait and see. That was the exact question I kind of zoomed in on reading what you sent earlier, is that, you know, it really doesn't apply to us.
Right, that's my impression.
So I think, I mean, the other provisions are probably the ADUs, which I think are just, that's gonna be enforced on us, but we allow them anyway. Yeah, and the growth zone piece, I don't know if that really makes sense here. I mean, we're rural zoning. There's definitely development pressure. There might be areas of growth, but I don't necessarily see that the same as, you know, in Scarborough or some of these other towns that are more developed and, you know, near urban centers where we've got, again, strictly rural zoning and it's all private residential land. So maybe someone sells out and it becomes more of a multifamily housing development in the future, but I just don't really see that today or really fitting into the town. I mean, I know they've done this analysis of the village center, but again, I don't know that I ever see that coming together. I mean, you're not going to attract any businesses here, I don't think. Yeah, the few that have been here haven't really lasted. So.
I think that's my fear with the prematurely going to designating a growth area opens us up to the 3 units and the 4 units before we've even seen the 1 units and the 2 units come in. And I don't think we're in a place or in a town where we know where those are going to land yet. Because there are families who are making decisions over the next couple of years and don't always know where those are going to happen. So right now, the 3 and 4 dwelling units does not apply to us, correct? So I'm not sure we should open that door until we've seen an actual conservation subdivision come through, because we haven't even seen one come through the new setup yet. So that's where I was landing when I saw this chart. I did not read all 24 pages, but luckily they had pictures. But I thought this was especially compelling given the realities in Pownell.
Yeah, I think I agree with everybody. The only thing I might ask you, Tom, is worst case scenario. What would that be? Some developer comes in, we don't have anything really written down, and they're gonna try and force some. What would they be doing? Just trying to get more bonus units and say, you have to let me build these extra units because I deserve a density bonus. And then we would have sort of a fight on our hand. Would that be worst case scenario?
That would be extremely worst case scenario, because I think that anyone that tackles a conservation subdivision is not going to be a redevelopment. going to be a person that's significant development or has conversely significant resources to hire consultants that can perform the soil suitability studies, landscape architects, civil engineers. There's a lot. You have to build a strong team to do a conservation subdivision. It's not an ordinary subdivision. And so I have a comfort level with the consensus of the board. I'm always about preparedness. And so it's better that we have the conversation and kind of look at these things on a case-by-case basis. And I think, Mercedes, that's what you're kind of hinting at. When our first case comes in, it's going to be quite revealing as to things that we, that are either absent in the ordinance or what the developer may or may not ask for in terms of waivers. Now, the formula that's set up by the state and the feds is at 2.5. So in the worst case scenario, it'd be an extra 0.5 density that they would be trying to argue with the board because they're allowed doubling the density by just ADUing it. So it's not complicated. And a lot, I think, also depends on how these conservation subdivisions are laid out, the intent of the applicant, the physical design of the site, and whether or not it's going to be a conservation subdivision at only high upper economic strata. In some cases, they may want to put in a small percentage for whatever reasons, or it may be a straight economic strata conservation subdivision. So it's premature to know that. We won't know until the first plans come in. And so I think Mercedes, there's great benefit to doing it as you've suggested. We do it on a case-by-case basis. And the first case will be our telltale case. Bearing in mind that, as I've said repeatedly, I want your first one to be a poster child. I want it to be the best it can be. And so let's keep our fingers crossed that we have the right applicant come in. Now, there's been, this is just a small part of my update report. Over the last half year, there's been 8 different developers / applicants that have showed expressed interest in conservation subdivisions. There's only 2 survivors. After 6 of the 8 did their research, they found that it just wasn't economically feasible to do. So it's a wait and see. Okay. Excuse me.
So I think we're all in agreement. Why don't we not do anything about LD 2003 at this moment? And then Tom, if you could just keep an eye on the progression of things and if we need to bring it back to the forefront.
What I'd like to offer to, yeah, absolutely. What I'd like to offer to the board is watching 2 things. Watching the legislature. A lot's going to happen this year. There's going to be a ton of housing bills. I'm on their direct matrix, so every bill that's going to show, I'm going to see. And some are going to apply and many others aren't. The second thing is, as soon as I get an early alert to whenever our first conservation subdivision is, I'd like to be able to brief the board on that. And at that point, you can be pivotal. You can decide, okay, now's the time. Yeah, okay. Let's not take any chances. But I'll be able to screen the applicant quite well and know what their portfolio of the past is, as well as what the poster child they're going to create for you. Okay?
Do we have the authority to allow the density bonus as it's written in the conservation subdivision? I mean, is that a waiver we could apply, or would that have to?
Well, you have the
Have
authority
some sort
through
of-
ADUs, and so that's the crutch for anyone who wants to increase density.
Which they can do,
Which they can.
right? But anything above that,
Above it,
For affordability.
currently, because of lack of infrastructure, would be a 0.5 a bonus. Would a developer argue that 0.5 bonus when you look at the construct of the way the state has written both the public law and their, what they call guidance, you can ask your code officers, but when I read that about 10 times, I saw a bunch of inconsistencies. And I saw a ton of mays. And so I found a lot of generalities that didn't answer point specific. And when we're analyzing a subdivision, we're looking at specifics. We're not looking at generalities.
Well, the other thing, my understanding of like town rules around setbacks and other pieces still apply. And so we have a bunch of rules around how much land is conserved. And as far as I understand, a lot of those would still apply, and that creates a whole bunch of challenges to increasing the density by a lot. So,
The dimensional standards are your best friend and your worst enemy at the same time. You can, I think, expect anyone that ventures into a conservation subdivision to be talking about those dimensional standards in order to achieve, let's say if you can get a bonus of another 5 or 10% in open space, is it worth having the conversation? In the case of the conservation subdivision, it is. And I can't imagine anyone that would be wanting to waste their time for a 0.5 density bonus.
unfortunately, I mean, I think I would love to see more affordable housing, but I think most developers, my guess would be they want to build expensive houses and they're not even going to try to get a density bonus with more affordable housing. I would put, you know, if I had to bet money, I'd put my money on not even developers, not even trying to build affordable housing, unfortunately.
Time will tell. Time will tell.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to bring it to a vote just so that there's, as to what the next direction is?
So I think the next direction would be to table this, table any changes. Just so I'm clear, any changes that we would have to do in order to comply to LD 2003 would be a change in the ordinance, which would require town vote, right? So there would be a fair amount of planning involved in that. Do we have to, and I appreciate your input on this, this is not my full-time job. Do we have to make a motion in order to table a subject, or can I just table it? Or are we tabling it? Or are we voting on not doing anything about it?
Well, you've got a kind of combination here. You're not doing anything about it, but you're tabling it.
Yeah.
And so I think the most appropriate, smoothest way is to table, and you have consensus with your board members. I would frame the tabling that it'll be revisited at a later time. It just kind of keeps an open door, but at the
Right,
same time, it
sure.
closes the door.
Right. But I don't need to make a motion to table an item.
No, I don't think there's an action here, though,
Yeah,
is there?
we're just-
Like, this is
we're
just
just
something
enacting.
that we need to be aware of, but there's no action that the board is either choosing not to take or taking, right?
Well, the state is saying that communities should take an action. You're tabling the action that you should.
We don't even
take.
know what the action, in our case, we,
In your case, it would be language that would be nested inside of the conservation subdivision in the subsection that deals with density bonus. Because in essence, that's the essence of it.
Yeah.
It's the density bonus. And as I comb through the ordinance, it is probably the only place that we could make it fit without a total rewrite of the whole ordinance. And so you do have, in a very clever fashion, a section in there, actually a sentence that speaks to density bonus. And so that would be the area that we would revisit at a later time. But it's also in the minutes, so Mercedes, I think that would be.
I'm not sure what I would be voting on in that case, because I don't know what that sentence is. So I think that's the only thing that makes me we haven't, like, we didn't have that conversation of
Mhm.
what we would need to do yet, because I would need to know what I was voting on.
I agree with that.
And if we want to have that conversation, that's great. I'm unclear what we have in this section.
Well, at a bare minimum, I would suggest that it be reflected in the minutes that there was consensus to table at this point in time. And then that way you've documented that you've discussed it, you've talked about it, and that you'll revisit it at a later time. And also that you did have consensus. I don't think anyone objected, right?
No. Okay, so I will say that we will, the planning board feels that we need more clarity on this before we can make an action. So we will table any changes to the ordinances in regards to LD 2003. So for moving on to new business, I believe that is all the old business we had. Becky needs us to come up with a budget for the planning board. I was hoping John was going to be here because neither Becky nor John could be here. And so I'll just throw out my thoughts to the planning board, and whatever anybody has to say, I'm open to suggestions. As Marcia put in the agenda, our current budget is $10,000. We have only spent $165, and I think that budget was as much as it was because we are leaning so heavy on North Star for the ordinance reviews. Obviously, that's not necessary anymore. In the current fiscal year, we've spent $170 in training, which covers the MMA meetings. There was $122 that applied to the Bradbury Mountain advertisement, the public meeting, which I'm actually a little confused about. I don't know if
Comes out of our budget.
why that would come out of our budget when it's really an applicant, I feel should be covering that. But I didn't know if that is including, they're paying us a fee to apply. Do we take some of those fees and apply it to whatever costs we might incur to have public meetings? I don't know the answer to that question. And then there was, the last item was $165 to support the town planner. I don't really see our budget changing a whole lot in the course of a year. I think one concern that Marcia had was that if we were requesting some additional test, water test, whatever, she implied, I think, that we might need money to cover that. But again, I feel that the applicant should cover that. And it's not like we would pay and then the applicant would reimburse us. The applicant would pay for that item. Yes, please.
The burden of proof and the burden of financial cost is on the applicant. It's not on the board. Even when you get to some point where, and I think the day is coming, perhaps this year, where you may need to retain a peer review. Now that peer review is typically almost always, not always, but almost always covered by the applicant too. Third party review. And I think given the complexity of some larger scale things happening in town, for example, although it's already passed on the Estabrook development, I'm surprised there wasn't a peer review. I'm very surprised on that. When you get a commercial enterprise of that scale, being the largest commercial scale thing in the town. You always have to have another set of eyes on certain things. So looping back, my suggestion to the board would be to preserve that $10,000 in next year's budget for unforeseen things. And I think that was the intent of the select board when they reduced, I think the original budget was $40,000 for North Star. The select board chose to reduce it, but keep 10 in case of unforeseen things. There might be times where we have to collaborate with an outside consultant that's not viewed as a application.
Okay.
So I would suggest you preserve it. We always look for, if there's, and when I get to talk about the water study, we always look for grant opportunities first, so we can lessen the burden on the taxpayers if there's a grant opportunity out there. But in some cases, we need to have matching monies too. So, but I'll talk more about that later.
I'm fine with saying, keeping the 10 grand in there and for unforeseen circumstances, and we haven't gone through subdivision yet, and if the select board thinks it's too much, they can always put in a different number, so.
What's the town expense supposed to be though? I mean, if we're barely spending that either.
Say that again?
The 12.5 for town expense, I mean, what's that supposed to be covering?
Oh, fine.
Well, looks like we've got two line items, right? Planning board town expense budget of 12.5 and then consultant for the planning board of 10,000. So we're saying we had 22.5 and we've spent like less than $500.
Oh, right.
So I mean, could the consultant just be paid through the town expense? I mean, does the planning board in aggregate really need that much?
No,
Doesn't look like it based on what we've spent.
no. Well, I mean, we could just drop, we don't really wouldn't imagine we'd even need the consultant, that piece anymore. Yeah, I wasn't even adding the two together. A question that I have, one, I assume that any fees the planning board collects, not knowing how the town works, but I'm assuming that any fees that the planning board collects just goes into the general fund of the town.
I believe so. Tim, is that correct?
Yep. If we were, my inclination, and the problem I don't have, or the problem that I have is I don't have much of a history here, although having been on the board with when North Star was part of the process, the budget was a lot higher, obviously. And that was the last few years. And I don't have any history prior to having North Star on board and what those numbers look like. But I would imagine, I mean, $10,000 for the planning board seems like a lot. So that would lead to my next question is, what if we went over budget? What if we made it 5,000? And we went over budget. We had some sort of planning board emergency. And we went over budget. How would that play out? Like, how hamstrung do we get if we don't have this money set aside for the planning board?
I'd like to call upon Tim, have been a selectman. When we have overruns like that, how traditionally does the select board handle those overruns?
Hi, Tim Giddens, prior select board member. So you still have to operate. I mean, if you've got projects in front of you, you still have to operate with those projects. So, you know, the town needs to find the money, move it from somewhere else. Every year, the town votes on allowing the select board to move 3% within the line items. So you're in general government, so, you know, that's a fairly large cost center. So they can take it out of the code enforcement and move it over here. You know, they can move stuff around to make sure you can operate. So, but you know, it's always good to, you know, if Tom thinks, or for some reason you think that you're gonna have two conservation subdivisions coming in, and, you know, the fee for those is whatever it is, I don't know what it is. It's good to at least budget that much, so I mean, that's what the fees are built there for, is to cover your expenses. So if you think you got three coming in, budget that way. So that's my 2 cents.
Should kind of put us in the neighborhood of
If you will-
5,000-ish.
Yeah, because your conservation subdivisions cumulatively are about $4,500 each.
Okay.
Yeah, from conceptual to in, and the likelihood of definitely one, and maybe the likelihood of two are coming in, so they're up in your $9,000
Okay, that's fair.
range.
Okay. Does anybody have any other thoughts on the budget?
Maybe we just keep the 12.5, drop the 10, or just, 15,000 in aggregate, something like that, but I think. Or keep both, but drop them. 7,500 apiece, something like that. 15,000.
Do we need a separate item for consultant, or can we just include that all under planning board expense?
Or I could
I
simplify
would
it.
think that we could just simplify it. Again, I think that goes back to when we had North Star, because that was such a big change for the town, having a consultant for the planning board. I think maybe they separated it out for that reason, but I'm not 100% sure.
Budgetary question, probably best directed to Becky
Right.
in the budget committee.
So.
Maybe a reason for having a
Right.
separate line item.
And I can ask Becky about that. So I'm hearing that maybe we keep it at 10,000, and then I will ask Becky whether we need to subdivide that into different groups.
Well,
I'm sorry, 10,000 in aggregate or 10?
Aggregate total.
I think my only concern, one, is I don't want too much money tied up here that pushes some other line, and I know this is not a ton of money, but at the same time, if we're truly not going to use this, I just don't want it tied up here and something else is, and I totally appreciate Tim's point of the select board gets to move some of this around. I think I'm always a little cautious, and I'd love to take like a half step rather than a huge step, just in case, if we got 3 this year. I think I always hate, once we give it away, we probably can't get it back. So I think that's my only other fear, because we haven't really seen a true application truly, we didn't see a true application this year either, in this budget with these lines. So I think that's my only fear. So I definitely would like to reduce this a little bit, but also maybe just give ourselves a cushion of going through what might be a more normal year of applications.
So what are you thinking?
Like, can we keep the 12.5?
Make it 12.5?
Yeah, instead of, yeah.
Yeah, I can't argue with that.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, my
If-
original thought was to drop it way down.
Yeah,
Uh,
as long as we can still pay someone out of the town, there might be a rule there or something like we have to pay out of that line.
I do think that this year is probably gonna be, this year coming up, be a better example of what we expect in the future as far as expenses. So we could always adjust it in the future, up or down, if we needed to. And we're just all we're doing is making a proposal to the select board, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, we're making a proposal of what we feel our budget should be, and we give it to the select board, and then ultimately they'll make the decision about what they want to give to us. So I don't think it would be too hard for us in the future if we felt a need that we could ask for more if it was warranted.
We get a gold star for being a committee that wants less money.
So I move that we propose a budget of $12,500 to support the planning board for fiscal year 2025, 2026.
Second.
Can I amend that motion slightly?
Yes,
Just as long as we could also pay some third party out of that line? Or you're saying that we might even keep them in two lines. Is that true?
I am going to double check with Becky.
Okay.
She really wanted to be here, so if we need to split it,
Thank you.
we could do that. And maybe I could amend that to say
12.5 total.
12, right, I move that we propose a budget of $12,500 to support the planning board budget for fiscal year 2025, 2026 in total, which would include both expenses and consultant fees. Does that work?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right, passes. And I'll just clarify with Becky the exact wording. All
If
right,
you don't like it, then you can add in.
Yeah.
consultant Money back in.
Right. So the next item would be the planner update, Tom.
Yes. I've got some very good news for you. The water capacity study is now complete. We went through a series of revamps in it because the engineering consultants were a little bashful initially in explaining some of the potential resources that we might be looking at in the future, should we decide to go to the next step. Rummel Environmental Engineering put this together, and I want to pay a huge public compliment to them. Amazing team. They really, every time we asked for something, they would get right on it, they'd get it done. They went beyond the scope of the services that were requested. An exceptional study. We have a lot of scientific evidence now that points to what we hoped would be true, that water is our greatest asset. In the study, which I can send you all a digital copy, or if you need a hard copy, let me know. You're the second to hear about this today. I met with the Economic Development and Sustainability Committee this afternoon because it was their initial charge to do this study. We found the grant money to do it, and it exceeds what I expected. And they've did an exceptional job. So we now have the scientific evidence. We now can prove that on the edge of one of our aquifer systems that we can produce 200 to 300% more capacity than from our current cistern, which produces about 20 gallons per minute on a good day. Our discovery was 40 to 50 on the well sites that were drilled. As you look at the report, and I'm happy to send it out tonight to all of you digitally. It's 75 pages, so if you prefer it digitally, I'll be happy to send it that way. Otherwise, I'll make a copy.
Digital's fine.
Digital fine for everybody? Okay. So why is this such good news to us? One is, it enhances our level of preparedness, for, both better fire suppression if this is pursued to the next step. Right now, we know where the water is. There's probably even better sites, and that came out in the engineering study, that there's probably some sites, depending on, but it'd all be on private property. So you have those extra factors of acquisition of properties and getting too far away from the center. This one's on the Knights property in the open field, far corner where you see all the turkey scattering. I'm sure you saw the well drillers out there. That's good news, really good news. So that gets us to first base. If we look at it as in a baseball metaphor, how do we get a home run out of this? The next logical step is to take it to deep civil engineering. We would need to do plans, profiles, elevations, spot elevations, and determine whether or not it's a gravity fed system. Is it a pump station fed? Are there pump stations and gravity feed? Is it a loop system or is it a non-loop system? Where are the laterals? What's the length of all those laterals and stubs? Not terribly complicated. However, it's an engineering study, and I'm going to be encouraging the town as a whole, as well as the Economic Development Committee, to do further investigation of going to getting us to second base. Now, what could happen is we get to second base and it sits there for a while. But this is a document that shouldn't be shelved. And let me explain the simple reason why we should be promoting getting to second base. Because with plans, profiles, pro formas, estimates for everything, we then have a shovel-ready project. Now, why is it important to have a shovel-ready project? Because if there is infrastructure monies at the federal level, they're usually 6 and 7 digits that could easily take care of a very small system like this. So that's where we're at. I'm very excited and happy for the town. And now it's up to the town to make the next decision. Not a very hard decision. I'm going to be encouraging everybody I talk with to pursue it as a civil engineering study that gets that next level of detail and shows us what the numbers look like. And so the obvious question is, how much is it going to cost us? We're looking for grant resources right now. And in here, our engineering consultants, after we collaborated, have dovetailed a couple of the 8 different resources that they've suggested. It looks like we're only likely eligible for 2 of them. So we're going to look to see if we meet the eligibility criteria. If so, then the majority of it would hopefully be paid for through a grant system. So I'm just really, really pleased where we stand on that. On Mr. Oh, wait, first of all, any questions on that? I'll send the full study to our CEOs and to the full planning board. EDC has it. Our select board has it digital format.
Like GP-COG, were they involved in this process?
You know, COG was absent from this particular assignment. This was pretty much an internal assignment between the committee and myself. I was the point man with the engineering group, and again, boy, they did a great job. You know, I've worked with a lot of civil engineers, and these guys really went to it. And what makes it nice is they all live in towns adjacent to us. So I think they have a vested interest too in seeing what we're doing.
Well, this report will go on like our public town website, right? So it'll be
Absolutely.
open.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Becky is working quite diligently in trying to reformat, reframe, and put a little bit more muscle into the system because it doesn't sync very well. It doesn't have memory. And so I think all that's being worked on. She's really focused on improving our website.
Yeah.
And the navigation on it.
I know like South Portland uses a program which isn't that great, but they called Board Docs, and like every time there's a meeting, everybody's supposed to upload their information to, you know, this place. And so in some ways, it's just both a alert system before a meeting as well as a record after the meeting of everything uploaded.
So, any other questions regarding the? Okay. If anybody has any detailed or scientific questions about it, after you've read it, give me a call. Mr. Brady's, proposal for phase one of a mobile home park, is in limbo, I guess is the best way I can describe it. He has retained a surveyor to begin the process. The first mobile, are there any mobile homes? No. The first mobile home development in this town is going to be almost as complicated as conservation subdivision. And so I wanted to alert the board, and you're all aware of this undoubtedly, that the mobile home park ordinance is woven to the site plan review ordinance, is woven to the subdivision ordinance. And there's no escaping it, because it's the beginning part of that mobile home ordinance. So I'd like to hear from the board, when an applicant comes in, whether it's Mr. Brady or anyone else, the level of completeness that you'd like to see before it approaches your table.
What's your recommendation?
I like to follow what the ordinance says. It says black and white, lists all the standards. However, applying what I call the fairness doctrine, with any applicant, if they feel that something, they may request a waiver, they're entitled to request waivers. But it would be perfunctory to do ask for a waiver after you invested $50,000 in civil engineering and went through the Site Location Act and the DEP. So I guess the board needs to probably now grapple with what's your fairness doctrine. Should an applicant be allowed to give a overview presentation and to request any waivers? I posed the question to him. He asked me if I could bring his sketch to the board. Our CEOs have seen the sketch, and the sketch virtually doesn't comply with any aspects of the ordinance. So, and I don't say that in a disrespectful way. He may have testing the waters, but I could not bring that to you in that state. However, if it becomes obvious that there will be a mobile home development in the community, do you want to hear from the applicant and see their intentions? And at that point, you could reinforce too that we've heard you, we've seen your requests. Now go back and perform the details and talk with the town planner. He'll bring it back to us after you've complied with everything that we didn't waive.
I lean towards, I mean, any applicant could email the planning board chair and say, I'd like to talk to the board about a project, and the planning board chair can look at the information available and discuss it with the town planner and either say, yeah, this is worth discussing in a meeting, or say, no, you know, you need to provide us more information so that we actually have something we can discuss. I don't know if there's, in some ways it can be kind of a case by case basis.
In the case of the mobile home park development, there's a huge amount of evidence that needs to be prepared and in pretty heavy detail. And then you run into things like, if the site is big enough, and if the cumulative footprint and land disturbance is big enough, it's heading to DEP for the site location app. So you've got a lot of different variables, and you're right, case by case basis.
I do think, as you say though, that like, there's not necessarily a point in a presentation if there's nothing for us to do with the presentation. Like, if there's not enough material really for us to give feedback on, then I don't necessarily, like, what does the applicant hope to achieve by doing an incomplete presentation? Do they have specific questions that they want from us? Get it to feel out before they move on to the next step, then maybe it is, but if it's not clearly communicated what they want by doing a presentation, then it may not be worth anybody's time to do it.
I think if it's clear and documented, should they be asking for waivers? And that sets the stage for making those decisions. The board has the full capacity to A or nay it. So an applicant may ask for a waiver, but they may argue, I'm not going to ask for the waiver after I spent $50,000 on the engineering consultants to do all this work.
Yeah.
To find out that you need it. So it's one of those unwritten things that's in our planning lives of what I call the fairness doctrine.
I
you
think
know.
it's fine, yeah, if they're at a certain stage and they're like, I could go this way or this way, I want to feel you out, which way is the best way to go? Or if you would even remotely entertain some waiver, then maybe it'll save the applicant time and money. But they also have to understand that if they are just going for a vibe check, nothing we say in the vibe check is we have to follow that later. So we could say, we'd be open to considering that, and we'd still reject it, and they spent $50,000, and they have to understand that a vibe check without
Let us
data is.
proceed. There's another way of handling this. Proceed when I ultimately do get the first sketch or conceptual, and it may not fulfill all the requirements of the ordinance the way it's written. There's nothing, if it's okay with the board, for me to submit that to you so that you can take a look at it.
Well, yeah, I mean.
Send you a digital copy of the plan, and I can also explain my basis for not sending it to you because the application is incomplete.
Yeah.
What the first thing I do is, did you pay your fees? And then I go through each of the checklists. When you do your first conservation subdivision, if there's an unchecked box, I'm not going to send it to you until everything's checked, unless there's a waiver being asked. It's the only exception to it.
I mean, yeah, in general, we would want to know any concerns you have or what you feel is missing from any application that comes to us, whether it's complete or not.
So you won't be seeing this one. I don't think you'll see it in February either. But I'll keep you posted on it, as I will keep you posted on the conservation subdivisions that may be forthcoming. The other thing that
Just maybe a housekeeping question. My understanding was that the only area where that was zoned for a mobile home park was actually on town land. Did I miss something? Did that change?
well, there's supposed to be two by the construct of the ordinance, and the town had committed to two specific town-owned properties. One of them now is default as a result of the Royal River Trust. And so as a result of that, the town has one. It needs to find another. That's sort of interesting you bring that up. The town should be looking at what another alternative site is of the current thinking amongst some of the public officials is that we should also be looking to see if anyone's interested on private sector.
So so he would actually need a waiver to build the mobile home park in a site that's not already designated for a mobile home park?
Well, he's not clear at this point whether it's the manufactured homes or mobile homes. Because those are treated in two different ways, right, Tim?
Isn't a manufactured home a house and a mobile home something different?
It's different only because it's got axle and wheel.
Yeah, right.
Well, where is he proposing to do this? On the town-owned property or on private property? That he,
He's contemplating private property,
that he owns or he wants to buy?
family owned.
But it's not approved for a mobile home park.
No, but, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill and Tim, you could put manufactured homes on.
But it would fall under just a standard subdivision then? Oh, okay, yeah.
So it's my understanding that since we created that ordinance, the state has pulled back and said you cannot designate areas. So, you know, it can happen anywhere. I could be wrong, but I mean, that's what I heard. So I think that needs to be researched to make sure that that
For sure,
is true or not true.
yeah.
So.
Do we have to have a mobile home ordinance though? I mean, I think remember that came up.
100% right, because of new state laws, you can put a manufactured home anywhere you can put a residential home of any type.
Correct. So I don't know about parks, but I know manufactured homes. is the
Right.
case.
So again, that becomes I would suggest this becomes a legal question, can you do a scattered grouping of mobile homes / manufactured homes and not call it a park? And treat it as just residences which are allowed in any of the zoning districts in the town of Pownell per new state law? Anywhere you can put a residence, you can put a mobile home or you can put a manufactured home.
Yeah, I mean, they'd be subject to the lot size requirements.
Yeah,
and
like a
so
2
it's
acre.
Not
That part
really a
doesn't
park.
really- it
It's a-
doesn't-
It's a subdivision.
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
What
it
they're
doesn't
asking
really
for.
change,
Yeah.
yes.
Self-repeats, so then it would drive the question, well, I want to follow the mobile home park ordinance because then I can build at 1,200 square.
Right.
Yeah.
So, kind of getting back to what my question is, it would seem that he would, in fairness, is it something that he could even do at all? And what would he need from us in order to do that? And before he's wasting a lot of our time, if it's not something that's even possible.
Big question, Todd. Okay, the jury's still out and the jury is basically getting a plan that adequately fulfills the requirements of the ordinance. So I'm in an interesting spot here now. Once I get the next level of plan, the one that our code officers have seen the first sketch, it's supposed to go to a conceptual stage. Let's see where that's at. If it's not, right now, my position is if it's not prepared properly, I can't send it to the board. If it's real close and it's missing one or two elements that are unclear in the ordinance and
Right.
need clarification, then
Is he submitting it under a mobile home park ordinance?
he hasn't said.
So
So
it's either a conservation or it's either conservation subdivision or a mobile home park, but a mobile home park is only zoned for specific places. So and if he wanted to change the zoning, where does he go to do that?
Town meeting.
I mean, so if it's a mobile home park, it doesn't have anything to do with us. He needs to go to town meeting. If it's a conservation subdivision, we'll look at it. So there's nothing for us to do
Yeah.
unless it's a conservation subdivision. If he wants to call it a mobile home park, he needs to take it to town meeting. It doesn't have anything to do with us at this point.
Unless that law has changed.
No, the law doesn't change. It only says you can put a mobile home park anywhere you put a single family home. I mean, a mobile home anywhere you put a single family home. It doesn't make mobile home parks pop up everywhere. Unless there's a different law.
You don't know that.
I-
You need legal counsel to tell you whether because we have a mobile park ordinance, and because the state has says you cannot designate an area for mobile homes, does that mean you cannot designate an area for a mobile park ordinance? You already have an ordinance.
Well, I guess we had talked about this with the conservation subdivision about just striking it all together. Do we need to have it? Maybe that's the next step too, is just getting rid of that whole mobile home.
Do you mean the mobile home park part?
Yeah, I mean, because it was poorly drafted. It doesn't really make much sense.
The limit in that is, because we live in an inclusionary world, that would clearly, be a court case for exclusionary zoning. If you were to extract that, and probably the state would bring you to court as well as an applicant.
The dimensions are so different here. Like
It's-
the dimensions are just wildly different from
Yes.
what we've laid out in the conservation subdivision. So I think that's what, and this has been in the news a lot. I think we have to probably make sure what the law really is here.
And then maybe add that to our short list to start reworking.
Wow.
A lot on our short list.
Yeah, but that could
Yeah,
create some
yeah.
things that just don't.
I think the best cumulative advice, and you chime in, Bill, but I agree wholeheartedly with Tim. This is a conversation that should be held soon, and it should be held with legal counsel, eyeball to eyeball, no texting or emailing decisions. Talk this through, okay? This is really, really critical. I'm not sure if you're aware yet, but our town council person has changed. And so this is even more critical now to determine where our legal groundings are going to be. There was an understudy to Natalie, and Natalie has served the municipalities quite well over the decades that has served. She is now officially retired. And so it would be good to meet. I know who the new attorney that's taking her slot for Jensen Baird. At some point, and I'm going to encourage the select board and all others that we have a conversation and list some of these critical things like, how do we treat things like this? How do we separate these mobile homes and manufactured homes? And still work in the confines of the state statute. And get these opinions from our town attorney. These are things that I don't believe any staff should mess with because they're legal. And we always have to think, how do we build our best position if we have to go to court? And so that's where I think town attorneys come in very valuable. Their best thing they can do for us is keep us out of court, or if we have to go to court, win the case.
I totally agree. You should consult the lawyer, but a mobile home park dimension standard is totally different than saying you can have mobile home on a single family home thing. I think that's a pretty big stretch, and I would guess the lawyer would say the same thing, but we'll talk to the lawyer, I guess, if they want us to talk to the lawyer.
Back to your original question, Tom, I think what makes me nervous about an incomplete app is especially when you shift to mobile home parks, there were so many other things that all of a sudden I was like, oh man, you really need to see how they're dealing with the density and the sewer here and the water. And I very much understand, I don't want to dump a lot of money into something that's going to be rejected, but at the same time, to Orion's point, how do we make a decision without some of this stuff? So I'm comfortable leaving it up to your professional judgment, but I also think whatever comes before this board is a public meeting. And so if they're going to bring something really sketchy, that it just doesn't look like they have full faith either. And it doesn't honor the board's time in terms of, can I actually make a decision? So I think that's my fear about the incomplete apps.
Yeah.
Because when you start to read through this, you're like, oh, I want that, I want that, I want that. Especially when you were talking, if we say this word, we're gonna need to know what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've read this mobile home, park ordinance so many times that I almost can recite it backwards. And one of the most challenging things is the first couple of sentences when it cross-references subdivision, site plan review, and mobile home park review.
Yeah.
That's a big bundle
Yeah.
of stuff that has to come up front.
And I think we did not clean that up, to Brian's point. When we did, we was so focused on
Yeah.
conservation subdivision, we didn't follow all the trails.
Yeah, but I remember it coming up and we flagged it. We
And
just- we
there's
got
so
kicked
many,
aside.
yeah.
So, would it be, worthwhile for the planning board to, since we have somebody who's sort of interested in maybe doing something, that we at least consult with a lawyer to find out what what our standing is with the state of Maine in regards to, as Tim was alluding to, maybe this is an unknown. It might be it might actually be a simple email. But it's all hypothetical at this point, but it might be a good idea for the planning board to, or the town in general, to know whether or not is it something that he can even do based on our ordinances, or can he do it based on state law?
Legal question.
So,
And I'm again, a believer in preparedness.
for sure.
Get your, town attorney, given it's a new town attorney. Okay, and he's a great understudy of Natalie. But nobody has really, I don't believe, other than myself, has met him.
So is that something that we do as a planning board? Do you do that as the town planner?
Does the select board do it?
Does the select board do it?
Is this on the select board's radar? Okay. I was just, yeah.
My best advice is be prepared, because conversely, any applicant, not just the one we're talking about, at some point, if they're doing a mobile home development, I can't imagine how they can do one without hiring legal counsel.
Yeah.
Because they're going to have to remedy the extent of the merger of all three of those ordinances together. We have to work with what's on the books, and so does the applicant. But because it's convoluted, it's going to be very, I think it's going to be legally challenged. I would be surprised that any mobile home development at any scale wouldn't have a legal conversation going on between the town and between the applicant's attorney. And I think that puts the planning board in a very good position too, because you can hear the attorneys kind of ground their conversation and make those determinations that are going to help you make your determination legally correct.
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't see why, why it would even come to the planning board before a lawyer had even vetted if if it can actually be, if it's even in the zone to be built in that.
This may be the case. You know, when I look at the surveyor's plan, if it has a dozen things missing, and the applicant contests that, well, I'm just gonna ask for a waiver on it. And I think it starts getting close to a legal discussion. Yeah. But have no fear. I'll look like an eagle on all applications, not just all of them. Reserve it. We're coming in, I think, to some complicated reviews, site planning and these types of reviews. That's one of the things I love most. So
You're in the right job then.
I'm going to be happy to do it. Yeah. I might get some battle bruises, but that's okay. One last thing that there's other things that we could talk about, but I wanted to alert the board that both from the MMA and from many circles of planning boards, the FOIA requirements are something that ultimately all board members should review and document that you either read what it's all about. Some communities do actually that. Their town attorneys have prepared very detailed rationales and FAQs on FOIA. And so they have all their committees go through it, but the most important committee is, or board is the planning board. I think it's coming to a point where it's going to be mandated that all committees and board members and staff members better understand FOIA. Again, it's preparedness. So I encourage you, I think there was one came up at the end of the year, and there's another one that's coming up. Some of them can be done by Zoom. I might talk with Becky about seeing if we can create an FAQ and just have everybody read it at their leisure and sign it and keep it in our records that we've read it. It's really
Yeah,
important.
I agree. Good. All right. Well, thank you for that. Next, we will go to the CEO update.
Yes, this is a clarification of the single lot ordinance, which should take, or hopefully will take some load off of you for 2025 and beyond. First, the background is currently as you may have read already, Pownell's land use ordinance states that if a person wants to create a single lot from an area of land that has previously been subdivided, the planning board must review it. Now, there are two caveats to that, and those will become clearer as we get through the following paragraphs. But in brief, if the single lot is being gifted by a donor to a relative, then that single lot is not considered a subdivision. Or if the single lot is being transferred to an abutter, it's not considered a subdivision. Now, going to the next section, the clarification, this is directly from Pownell's single lot ordinance. Basically, there's two statements. If it's being divided by that if it's from a subdivision, you need to review it, and if it's not from a subdivision, or the very first lot, we need to, the CEOs can take care of it. Now, if you look at the definition, this is right from section 400 of our definitions. The key part is on the second page. You flip it over. The term subdivision also includes all additional criteria pursuant to Title 30-A, Section 44(1), and that's that's from the state. And if you look at on that paragraph, Title 30-A, Section 44-1, D4, and it describes that a division accomplished by a gift to a person related to the donor of an interest in a property held by the donor for a continuous part of 5 years prior to the division by a gift does not create lots for purposes of this definition. And it goes on to describe basically if you're giving, in summary, a piece of land to one of your children, then you don't have to come through the planning board. And then if you go further down to section, in that same, was it B1, section B? Okay, now where's the one that says for? Sorry. This section where it says about, and a butter. Okay, here it is, yeah. Okay, D6, a division accomplished by the transfer of any interest in the land to owners of land abutting the land does not create lots for the purpose of this definition. Now, if for some reason we hadn't wanted to include those two caveats, we would have had to, as an H-2 on the last page, we would have had to file our conflicting definition at the county registry of deeds by June 30th of 2020. Since we didn't meet that, or we didn't do that, the state definition stands. But anyway, this should make it easier for all of you. In fact, we've got one right now where person is a young couple wants to, they've got a piece from their parents and they want to subdivide it, right? And it had been subdivided before, but now they don't have to come to you. And they meet all the other requirements. And there's lots of other information. We do have to look at the 5 years, and et cetera. And Tim?
Couple of comments on that. So this differs from the way this worked in the past. I don't know, but I have a feeling at some point the definition of subdivision changed in our ordinance, probably because we didn't file in time, and it had to change. But, a subdivision is described as a division of 3 lots or more. So in the past, if it was a subdivision at all, it had to go back to the planning board. So the way I'm reading this right now is if we follow, the ordinance, because it's not technically a subdivision when one lot is split off, then it doesn't need to go back to the planning board. The code enforcement officers can handle that. So I just want clarification, a head nod or, that's the right way to read this. Because there's this one that's going to be a family member, and that's pretty much cut and dry because of state law, that it's not a subdivision. There's another one that's up that was a division in 1982, I think it was, where somebody bought a large tract of land, 80+ acres, took the farmhouse, and that kept the original lot number. And then the rest of the property was split off. And that was the dash number, the accessory number. So they now want to come and split off a minimum size lot off from that, but that was part of our previous subdivision in the previous way we used to do this. But now if we follow the new definition of a subdivision in our ordinance, it wasn't a subdivision because it's less than 3 lots.
I thought subdivision, but this is saying everything's a subdivision, whether it's less than 3, even if it's less than 3 lots, unless it was gifted or it's in a budding.
I think the language is in front of you there that a subdivision happens when you split off 3 or more lots.
Yeah, you have to read that. It's not so much confusing, but you do have to read that definition about 4 times where they're talking about 3 or more lots within any 5-year period.
Yeah, it's just contradictory with A1 above, right?
That's ours. A1 is ours. Yeah, well, actually was our, as it's written right now, but lo and behold, when you get down to our new definition, yeah, you're right, the ordinance versus the definition.
Well, you have to count any division as a subdivision. Because I could just say, I'm only subdividing this lot once. And then I could say, I'm only just subdividing that lot I just subdivided once. And I'd only do it.
5 years. That's where the 5-year clause comes in.
That's what I'm
Only
saying,
do it once
but,
every 5 years.
but that's what I'm saying, though, like cutting your parcel in half starts a 5-year clock.
So like I said, on this other property, this particular property, it was 1980 that this subdivision happened.
Yeah.
So it's, in a lot of ways, it can be handled by the select board easily. And, for the benefit of the applicant, the taxpayer, it's $300 to go to the select board to have it, and it's $2,000 to go here and have it done. And it's cut and dry. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm getting at is, I think the provision is here in our ordinance, and it, depends on how you want to interpret it.
If it was in the 80s, then it doesn't.
That's more than 5 years.
Yeah, anything more than 5 years, they can
Yeah.
pick it up.
But that's not the way it used to be handled on single lots, or, if it went before the planning board before, it has to go to the planning board again.
we don't want.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
we
a lot of
wanna
work
see
for you guys.
everybody who's- If it was a subdivided 10, 20, 30 years ago, it's its own new lot now and we don't need to see it, yeah.
There are certain circumstances where you might want to see it, but I don't think this is one of them. You know, if you had a large subdivision and it was very convoluted, then, you know, it might need to go back to the planning board, and that would be the CEO's discretion to say, yeah, I don't think I can handle this. You know, it goes here.
Yeah, if you think it's confusing because of the history of the lot, then then
Correct.
it's your discretion to say, I need another set of eyes. But in general, anything over 5 years should be good to divide again.
Again, because it's different than we used to do in the past, I just want to make sure that it's. Okay.
Thank you.
That all that you had? Perfect. That was great. Thanks for that addition.
Yeah, I mean, the one other thing is with like the conservation subdivision is we have a density requirement. And so once you reach that density requirement, it doesn't matter if it happened 50 years ago. You can't divide more lots out of that area unless the town changes the density requirement.
So that, I'm not gonna go over the communications that Marcia has listed, that's all for the public. Did anybody else have anything to add tonight? Yeah.
There was some speculation that there may be a difficulty in forming a forum in February 19th.
I was gonna bring that up, right?
The board could decide which evening it wants to meet up. Or
I
if
think,
the 19th still works.
I think, no, I won't be here. I don't know. Marcia, you won't be here.
Mercedes in Florida.
Sorry. You're right, yeah. Someplace nice and warm. So Marcia won't be here, Mercedes won't be here, I won't be here.
Sounds like we should do it a different day. The 26th, you said you were available?
Tom, you said the
Yes,
26th?
we'll definitely be able to attend that.
I believe I can make it on the 26th.
I do have work.
I can make it. As of now.
And Bill?
Yeah.
You can make that?
Which day?
The 26th,
February?
right?
Yes, it will.
Okay. So that would still, that would give us a quorum. So why don't we do that, since you can make that date, Tom? Let's plan on doing, February 26th. I will let Marcia know. And then I think she can make the necessary changes or have the changes made to the website to let the town know. The meeting will be on the 26th. Doesn't look like we really have anything at this point on the agenda, that February meeting yet. So we'll wait and see. Yeah, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Good.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
You all kept saying Becky. I thought Becky left.
she's back.
What?
I just told you. I
Is she back for good?
believe so.
What?